Okay, so we're going to start the video with a very brief revision of what we have learned so far. We have learned the three variables to pick an option contract. We have learned the two types of options contracts that you can select. Then we've learned what it means for the buyer and the seller when they enter into those two types of contracts, puts and calls. So that really just leaves one more decision, and that is if you want to buy or sell a contract. We understand the potential for gain or loss now when we are either buyer or seller of puts and calls, but now how does that help us determine which action we would like to take? Let's focus more on the option contract price now. Now remember when I said the options contracts have predetermined prices? So for now, forget about everything else and just focus on that contract price. This contract price is super integral in how we make money from trading options. First, I need to explain that in most circumstances, you don't usually make money from the advantageous purchase or sale of the stock inside the contract, but rather from an advantageous purchase or sale of the option contract itself. Remember, that option contract has value itself. Think of it as a representation of the 100 shares of stock comprised within. That price is constantly changing the whole time it is active. In this lesson, we'll focus on that basic concept of buying and selling to help you determine which action you would like to take. Both can be profitable. Let's first use an easy to understand example of buying actual shares of stock. Stock price is always changing. If your first action was to buy shares of a stock and then that stock price went up, then you sold the shares for a higher price and you would make money. That's an advantageous trade. If the stock price went down and you sold your shares for a lower price, then you would lose money. That's not an advantageous trade. Okay, pretty easy, right? You should definitely understand that. Buying first and then trying to sell it later at a higher price can also be known as going long. Now let's look at the opposite action to that. Stock price is always changing. If your first action was to borrow shares of a stock and sell them immediately, then the price goes down and your second action is to buy those same shares back at a lower price and then return the borrowed shares, then you would make money. That is an advantageous trade. If the stock price goes up and your second action is to buy the shares back at a higher price and then return the borrowed shares, then you would lose money. That is not an advantageous trade. Essentially, you're selling shares and you're trying to buy them back at a cheaper price and pocket the difference. This is known as shorting or going short. So you should have an understanding of these two concepts and how to determine your action based on your price speculation. If you think the stock price is going up, then buy. If you think the stock price is going down, then short, aka sell. Okay, we're going to apply that same concept directly to an option contract now, more specifically to the price attached to that contract. And let's start to get used to referring to that contract price as premium. Now remember that one option contract represents 100 shares of a stock. So let's put all the 100 shares into one bag. This is our option contract. So the contract itself has a premium, a predetermined price. It is always changing. Let's look at an option contract buyer. If your first action was to buy an option contract and then the premium of that contract goes up, and your second action was to sell that same contract at a higher premium, then you make money. That is an advantageous trade. If the premium of the option contract goes down, and your second action was to sell that same contract for a lower premium, then you lose money. That is not an advantageous trade. Now let's look at an option contract seller. If your first action was to sell an option contract, and then the premium of that contract goes down, and your second action was to buy back that same contract for a lower premium, then you keep the difference in premium and make money. That is an advantageous trade. If the price of that option contract goes up and your second action is to buy back that contract at a higher price, then you lose the difference in premium and you lose money. That is not an advantageous trade. Okay, so this was a pretty easy lesson, and it's just to reinforce the actions you can decide to take based on your risk tolerance and your price speculation. Let's simplify that and look at the key takeaways. Depending on your strategy, usually you make a profit or loss by trading the premium of the option contract itself, not from a transaction of the shares within the contract. When buying a contract, you want the premium of that contract to go up. When selling a contract, you want the premium of that contract to go down. Easy, right? But now you're probably wondering, okay, but what makes the premium of an option contract go up or down? That leads us to our next lessons in the course, where we're going to check that out in order to help you determine best what style of options trading you prefer, buying or selling, or maybe both. Have a good day.